Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley here for Gene, what's going to be a jam-packed episode. We're in mid-April, and there are no shortage of topics to talk about thanks to transfers and recruiting. So it's going to be a busy, April is kind of it used to be the dead time or kind of downtime of basketball after the championship game. Not anymore. Now we've got all kinds of recruiting and transfer stuff to talk about in April and even into May at this point. Even last year, April and May both were pretty busy times for Tennessee on the recruiting front and the transfer front. So I'll talk about that in just a second. I do want to thank all of you all for tuning in, whether you're listening on your podcast app of choice or you're watching on YouTube. Thank you all so much. If you are on YouTube, please give this video a like. We would really appreciate that. And share your comments down below. Love to hear your thoughts on everything we're going to cover, because we're going to cover Josiah-Jordan James, cryptic tweet. We're going to cover Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, and also kind of look at, now that Tennessee has another roster spot open, kind of what the plan may be and who Tennessee's pursuing there. So got a lot to talk about. So please share your comments down below on the video. If you're not watching on YouTube and still want to chime in, if you have a Twitter, go check out. I started a communities thing on there. There's a new feature on Twitter that is a communities feature that has like specific kind of segmented, it basically kind of segments out Twitter to where, if you want to talk about a specific subject, you don't have to blast it out to everybody on your timeline. You can actually join a community on there and talk about it specifically on there. So I created a Vol Basketball Fever community on there to talk about Vols and Lady Vols basketball. So go check it out. I tweeted about it from my account, but I may go back and tweet it again and pin the tweet to my profile. But if you just go to the communities tab, if you have that available on your Twitter profile, some people I still don't think has rolled out for. If you just search Fall Basketball Fever, it'll pop up for you. But I may tweet it out from my personal handle, which is Mr_Rutherford, and pin it to there as well. Well, Gene, before we get into the meat of the podcast, I do want to mention something that became a little bit of a story / a freak out moment on, what was it? Tuesday night. My days are running together. We would have recorded this on Tuesday, but I was sick starting Monday afternoon and all day Tuesday. So due to illness, did not record until Wednesday afternoon, or I guess early Wednesday evening, however you want to classify this time, Gene. But the big story, or big, again, freak out moment that happened on Tuesday night was a tweet, surprise, surprise, by Josiah-Jordan James. I'm going to pull up the exact tweet because now I have forgotten the exact wording, but it was during the Tennessee's baseball game, which I think people thought maybe it was about the Tennessee baseball game. My only pushback against that was I'm pretty sure it happened like in the 5th or 6th inning when the game wasn't decided at that point. Of course, Tennessee ended up losing to Tennessee Tech. Unfortunately for Tennessee, ending their winning streak. But he tweeted out Josiah-Jordan James at 7:55 p.m., which the baseball game didn't end until about 9:45 maybe, so almost 2 hours before the game was over. So that kind of gives you a timeline of when it was. Tweeted out, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened," with an orange heart emoji. That was the thing that I think people are getting hung up on. If he just tweeted that out, I think people are like, that could mean anything. Don't know what you're talking about. But the orange heart emoji, I think, is what kind of made people worry a little bit. And people were saying, "Oh gosh, is he leaving? Is he going to declare for the draft? He's not coming back." But Gene, from what we've seen, main people out there saw Austin Price tweet about it. Grant Ramey, I think, said something about it too. It doesn't seem like anything is coming from this. It doesn't seem like that was a cryptic message from Josiah that he's leaving UT. And you and I were talking before we started recording here. That also would be like a complete 180 of the type of personality that I think Josiah has. He's not a cryptic tweeter when it comes to. He's not, for lack of a better example, he's not Brian Maurer. he's not subtweeting his feelings and putting announcements out there with a cryptic tweet. Like, it just doesn't seem like him. So the orange heart kind of threw me a little bit when I first saw it, like when it happened on Tuesday night. But I gotta be honest with you, I was thinking there's a very low chance this was his way of saying like goodbye to Vol Nation. So I want to talk about it just briefly because that was a big thing that happened and it revolves Tennessee basketball. But Josiah, I think, like Santi, is going to test the waters of the NBA, but I think both guys are going to be back next year.
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, he's never really come across to me as the type of person who craves attention. That's not how he operates. It's not how he's wired. Josiah, obviously, so I'm speaking about here. And, it didn't really come to my attention until like this afternoon, the tweet. And again, I didn't know the time frame element of it, but it does seem as though it's more of it's something. It doesn't pertain to basketball. We'll say that much. It doesn't pertain to basketball, and I think that's because I think sometimes you just have to ask, like, from a logical perspective, like, who does this, like, what is the most logical move? And I don't think there's one specifically that pops out except for him to come back. Now, if he chooses to, weigh his options or whatnot, then so be it. But I don't feel like there's like one specific place for him to go next season that makes it that is better than the one that he currently has, especially when you factor in the NIL money. If you look at what happened with Armando,
Baycott.
At Carolina, got a nice little deal. Who's going to be paid a nice amount of money to stay in college. That's the benefit of NIL is, if kids who are kind of on the fence, if they don't get a first round grade, for the NBA, then if they don't really want to do the professional route and potentially have to go overseas and whatnot, then they can go back to their school. And, at some of these larger programs, your Power 5, Power 6s, Tennessee's, Carolinas of the world, there's a lot of money to be made just by sport. Because now, let's be honest, like, Josiah is the face of this program. And that matters. If you want to think about it, like Josiah is the face of the program because it was Fulkerson. It's been Fulkerson for the past 3 years. Before then, it was obviously Admiral and Grant. And it's not to say that there are better players. There aren't. I mean, that Josiah is the best player, but that's not always the answer as to who the face of the team is, who the heartbeat of the team is. Like, that's Josiah. And it behooves him to stay right where he is. I think it was the great philosopher Jeremy Pruitt that said, bloom where, grow where your feet are planted. And, ever since the great philosopher Jeremy Pruitt made that comment, it stuck with me for the rest of my life, and it will. But yeah, I don't take that to mean anything. I mean, obviously the kid loves it in Knoxville. He's been through a lot. He's overcome a lot. If you just look at just what this last season's become for him, and he's going to have more opportunity to grow over the next year or so, however much longer he stays, because I believe he has 2 years left.
Yep.
If he wants the COVID year. Yeah, if he wants the COVID year. So he's still got a couple of years to kind of figure some stuff out. And I think that would be wise of him to, fully take advantage of your college experience, because once you get past college, it gets rough out here.
Yeah, those are good points. I think a follow-up, I would love in a future off-season podcast to talk about the face of Tennessee basketball for this season, because I think you're right about being Josiah, but I'd be interested to hear our listeners' thoughts and maybe run a poll of who they think it is, because I think there'd be a considerable amount who would vote for, even though he's just going to be a sophomore, vote for Ziegler or maybe even Vescovy. So I think that's a good point by Eugene, though. I think it's Josiah as well, but I think that's a good one to talk about maybe in May or June of who is the face of this team, and just kind of get a check, I guess, of a vibe check or so from our listeners on that one. But let's get to the meat of this, because since we last spoke, we talked about there being probably at least one more transfer. And since we last recorded, Gene, there's been two. First one wasn't, I would say, not really a surprise. It was Quentin DeBonge. He ended up following Michael Schwartz over to ECU, and Schwartz had a big hand in the international recruiting for Tennessee over the last few years. And I think he was Quentin's main recruiter for Tennessee. So again, doesn't make a lot of it doesn't surprise me, I guess, that he's transferring there, because he did not really play a whole lot this year. He flashed some potential in the minutes he played, but he played in a small handful of games this year. He was going to be kind of buried behind the depth chart again this season. And you look at kind of what Tennessee, how they've been recruiting in the backcourt, and there's maybe a path to playing time the following year, but even then it was, I mean, it depended on what Josiah did and if he came back for another year or not too. Again, would Quentin have a whole lot of playing time in his third year at Tennessee? So I understand him moving on to go to ECU, to go to the coach he, really liked and had a relationship with really strongly with Schwartz, and go to a program where he's going to have playing time for sure, I would imagine, as long as he's good enough over ECU. But the big one that's obviously garnered the most discussion for a lot of reasons is Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, who, from Clarksville, Tennessee. He played at Scotland Prep before he came to Tennessee. I think wherever he transfers to now, Gene, if I remember right, is going to be his sixth school in 6 years, because he transferred a lot in high school too. But he stayed at Tennessee for 1 year, and it was rumored that he was going to transfer, and then it came out as a report that he was transferring, and then he himself announced it, addressed Smoky Dog Nation in his tweet message, which I thought was interesting when he made his message that he's transferring. But the 6'10", 246-pound freshman forward is going somewhere else. Don't know where that somewhere else is going to be yet. There's been a lot of talk about Georgetown, a lot of talk about Auburn, a lot of talk about if there's a third school, I'm trying to remember now, but there's been 3 or 4 schools that have been kind of thrown around there for kind of the big ones for him. But Gene, I don't even know where to start, because there's a lot to kind of unpack with this. I went back from the moment I was first hearing the rumors, and I texted you about it, but you were in Atlanta, so I mean you were very busy, so I didn't expect you to have information on there, but I texted you because you and I had talked about Brandon Huntley-Hatfield a lot since we've done this podcast. And from the moment I saw the rumors about it and was texting you about it, I went back to those earlier conversations we were having about what kind of player was Brandon going to be on this team, because he had the build. His build at 6'10", 246 is that prototypical 4, even kind of 5 that you would imagine would have success in the Rick Barnes offense and the Rick Barnes defense and the system that he runs. You look at what Grant Williams is, an undersized 4. If Brandon Huntley-Hatfield had the desire to play that type of position, that type of 4, he really, really could have flourished in this offense, because he's bigger than Grant Williams ever was and ever will be at that 4 position. But he didn't have that desire. And from what I heard from Chris Lowe of ESPN, who was on WNML this week, there was a conversation had after the season with Huntley-Hatfield and Rick Barnes and the coaching staff about his role moving forward. I assume they have those conversations with every player after the season. But it seemed like he, from what Chris Lowe said, wanted to be more of kind of a 3 type position, be more used in the perimeter, maybe not as much in the post. And that led to a lot of reason why he decided to transfer, because that wasn't the role that Rick Barnes wanted him to play. And that wasn't the role that he felt, Barnes and the staff felt that he could better serve this team moving forward, was that, they wanted him to be more of a 4, a guy down low who could make some shots in the perimeter, but he wanted to be more of a 3 who was more wing oriented. And Gene, that brings you back to conversations we had about when he first committed and first, I guess, signed with Tennessee and reclassified, because that was something I think you honed in on like immediately about him. Is he going to want to play the post position the way Rick Barnes wants him to play it? And it never seemed like he did and really wanted to that much. And it seemed like the times when he bought in, he flashed some really good potential in some of those times with some of the aggressiveness on his rebounding and some of his ability in the post, but he settled way too many times for a fadeaway jumper, for taking jump shots, than he did for attacking the basket. And my question is, and you and I were kind of talking about this before we started recording, if that was his idea all along of kind of what he wanted to be, I'm curious what the initial recruiting pitch and like what the continued recruiting pitch was for him, because I don't imagine that, like, I don't know, Gene, because I can't imagine Barnes and them changing that all of a sudden. I mean, like, hey, yeah, we'll use you as a 3, we'll use you as a guy who can kind of roam the perimeter, unless they sold him, as you kind of suggested to me, maybe they sold him as like a Yves Pons type, where you play the 4, but you can play the 3 and be a perimeter guy like Pons was. He got used as a post, but he also, again, took a decent amount of 3-pointers as his time at Tennessee. Maybe they sold him on that, But then maybe as the season went along, the needs adjusted. You had Olivia Camwell go down, and you need a guy at the 4 there. I don't know. It just seems like to me, I never really thought he was going to be a perimeter oriented 4-3 hybrid. Like I thought he should, like the way he's built and everything, be more of a 4. I don't know. I'm curious what the initial recruiting pitch was to him and what he was told coming in, because either there was a disconnect or maybe he had hopes that things would change, or maybe he was told, I don't know if he was told something different. Maybe he misinterpreted. Like, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. Like at either side, I'm genuinely just like wondering, like, what was the recruiting pitch and where's the disconnect? Because I just have a hard time imagining that he was sold on being this 3-4 hybrid when he has the build to be a great 4 in a Rick Barnes system. Like, I don't know. There's a lot to unpack here. That's kind of where I want to start, is your thoughts on it, because this is something you and I have talked about for months and months and months about what's his fit in this team, because he has the build and the body type and whatnot to be a 4, but does he have the mentality or even desire to want to do that? And clearly he did not.
Right. And I think it's why, like, the biggest difference was, like, and one of the things, like, when people, bring up, like, the Grant Williams types and kids like that, like, the reason why Grant Williams had nothing in the way of offers was never that he wasn't a good basketball player. Is that he didn't fit the metrics. He was 6'6", what was he, like 240?
Yeah.
Or something like that when he first got to Tennessee. So you're looking at a kid who's obviously very skilled, but if he was 6'9", he would have never got there. It's like sometimes it's the difference between kids who in football, end up going to the FCS level and they're extremely productive. And you see like a kid like Chattanooga has a defensive end who's like 6'2", 290 and has like 35 sacks in his career. So I don't remember exactly, but it's like some outlandish number. He's an like 2-time All-American. If that kid was 6'5", 290, they would have never got him. So the metrics worked in Chattanooga's favor. Like, everybody else's loss is their gain. And so Grant didn't pass the eye test, much like Admiral didn't pass the eye test. When that actually speaks to Rick Barnes' eye for, being able to mold and develop players, but also that was a lot of those players just gained confidence in what they were doing. Like, they were just good basketball players who were given one shot to be elite somewhere. And the place that they got that shot at was in Knoxville. So fast forward a few years, I think I remember us talking about one time, like, what is the ultimate plan for Rick Barnes in recruiting? Because I don't understand. Like, he made his, and I asked that question because I just really needed to know. Like, if you watch Brandon Huntley-Hatfield play, like in AAU, if you watched him, this was a kid who lived out on the perimeter, who shot jump shots all the time, who drove to the basket, who was 6'10", 240. That's part of what made him so elite, was that he had great leaping ability. He was strong. It's hard to stop 6'10", 250 going to the basket. That's essentially LeBron. And it's hard to stop, LeBron when he gets a full head of steam, even at, 38 years old or whatever he is now. And that's kind of what Huntley-Hatfield probably fancies himself as. Is that reality? Perhaps not. But try telling a kid who also cut his high school career short to start college in Knoxville that, oh, yeah, we know the player that you fancied yourself to be for 15 years, 16, 17 years, whenever you first picked up a basketball. But no, we don't want you to be that. And we're in a day and age where basketball is getting, where big men are transitioning further and further away from the basket. And so now you're trying to tell him to play what he probably feels is an antiquated style of playing basketball. Go post up and bang with guys about your size or bigger or the same size or a little bit smaller, but probably stronger. Go bang down there with those guys. But I'm not surprised that the kid's in the portal. I've talked about it all year. Like, probably need to play this kid. You need this kid to be great. For this roster, you need this kid to be good. I don't care about the ranking. I don't care about the 5-star. Once you get to college, nobody gives a damn about your ranking. It's used by recruiting sites who write about college, that talk about how good a player is. And it doesn't speak to how good the actual player is once they get to college, because now you actually have to prove what you are. So I don't care about the fact that the kid was a 5-star in high school. He's in college now. It doesn't matter. If the kid had 2 stars and all of a sudden exceeded that, are you going to keep bringing up he's a 2-star? No. So who cares? Just, he's a college basketball player. He got there. He fits all the metrics to be good. It didn't work out, but it's not the least bit surprising. It's probably, yeah, I guess it's a blow. Like if you look at the history of particular programs, it's not really a surprise. AAU programs, it's not really a surprise. I mean, just look at there's a pretty good history of it not working out for kids at certain that come from certain programs, and they find a different place. And again, I would assume, those programs have connections with certain schools. So I wouldn't be surprised if Brandon Huntley-Hatfield ended up at Auburn next year. Pretty lateral move, and I mean that in a bad way. I mean, he's going to SEC to SEC. Some of those kids from that, from those programs have to take a step down, and then they thrive. So maybe Huntley-Hatfield's second stop will be the place that he thrives at, which will hurt Tennessee fans. But also what helps is that the second program, maybe he'll get a full dose of reality as to what he actually is as a basketball player. Because I don't think he's what he thinks he is for college. But he spent a whole lot of time being, in his mind, Jabari Smith, and it's more likely that he's Walker Kessler. And I'm not saying that specifically because Auburn's one of the schools interested. That's just a perfect comparison, because those two bigs are polar opposites in how they played, but they were each effective in what they did. And so, like, I will have an eye on where that kid ends up at. I mean, look, had a chance to talk to him and meet him last year in Gatlinburg at an AAU tournament. He's a nice kid, seems like he's a good kid, and he deserves success. And obviously for Tennessee fans, it's unfortunate it's not going to come in Knoxville. You kind of hope that he gets out of the SEC, but ever since the SEC changed that rule to where in-conference transfers are allowed now, there's no guarantee that's going to be the case. And so you're talking about a well-traveled kid who doesn't mind moving from place to place to place. There's certainly going to be a market for the kid, and we'll see where he ends up. But I mean, if you've listened to our program, then this isn't really news. I mean, the stuff that Chris Lowe said is not really news if you've listened to this program, because Nathanael and I have talked about this ad nauseum throughout the course of the year. It's just, it stinks because it actually happened. I was the crazy person out here on an island in November and talking about this kid, or back in the preseason talking about what is this kid going to be. And, maybe I had visions of what he was going to be that was probably similar to what Huntley-Hatfield thought. He thought he was going to be Eve Pons. But, he got there and the system changed, and things didn't work out for him. And maybe, I think you brought it up, maybe if Olivier had not gotten injured, he would have had a chance to, to kind of have a much smaller role and develop into the sort of player that he envisions himself to be. But when Olivier got hurt, he goes in there and you got to be a banger. And I don't think he liked that. It's quite obvious he didn't like it. I mean, don't need to beat around the bush. He didn't like it, or otherwise he would not have stayed. And end of the year meetings are common. Usually, coaches just talk to you about, how the year went. What do you think you can improve on? What do you see yourself being? Where do you see your role being? Just typical questions. They happen at the high school level. They happen at the college level. They happen everywhere. And that's usually when kids hop into the portal, is, soon after that. And so, yeah, anyways, not surprised. Tennessee fans, it's very unfortunate for you. They'll have to figure some stuff out, because I think ultimately this reclassifying and going to college a year early. I mean, we didn't even mention Tamba, who's also in the portal, who also reclassified and graduated a year early, graduated high school a year early. He's already in the portal. He never really made a ton of sense for what they were trying to do, although he's more of the prototypical big that Rick Barnes wanted, but that he likes and prefers. And, you know, like, it doesn't really work out. It doesn't. Like, I understand the desire to hurry up and get to college, but, you know, all these kids, when they're making decisions, need to be realistic about their decisions. And I completely understand the desire to bet on yourself if you're a kid like Tamba. Huntley-Hatfield was going to have options regardless. He was.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have picked this school regardless. But Tamba, I don't think the market was going to necessarily be there for him. I mean, like, if you just look at the star ranking, how he played, more of a back-to-the-basket center, good player. I just felt like his market was probably more of what say Quez Glover, his market was. And obviously he had a great year at Samford this year, started his career at Florida. You know, look at what Drew Pember did at UNC Asheville after spending a couple years in Knoxville. You can chase dreams, and sometimes it works out for you. But most of the time, and as the transfer portal suggests, most of the time it's not going to work out in the way that you hoped.
Yeah, there are a couple points there I wanted to build off of and kind of talk about and then ask your opinion on something. But one of them was the reclassifying part, because that's Tennessee's had a few guys reclassify recently. I mean, it's been a thing that's happened in the past too, but recently for Rick Barnes, that really the only one that's worked out was Ziegler, but he was a guy who he's not young. Like I remember Mike Wilson of Knox News talking about this. Like he reclassified, but he was already I think he was supposed to be part of the 21 class initially. I can't remember what it was, but he's not he wasn't supposed to be like a high school senior.
Yeah, he was. He was a 21 that was going to. He was a class of 2021 signee, if I recall, that was going to go to a prep school to look for opportunities. And I think from what the great piece that Mike Wilson of the Knoxville News Sentinel did on it, I think he went to an AAU tournament and got seen at the last tournament of his season. And it's not uncommon for kids who are high school graduates or already done with their high school eligibility to play for AAU teams. It's quite common, to be honest. And it obviously worked out for him. But his was a reclassified up to, he had actually reclassified back and then just reclassified back to 2021. And I think he was going to go to a prep school last year.
Yeah, right. So his was a different situation, because looking at the actual reclassified people who Tennessee's, I guess, signed and gotten over the last few years have actually all been bigs. It's just kind of interesting that that's the case. I wonder if there's a causation and all that stuff that doesn't always correlate. But I'm curious if it does correlate with we've talked before about recruiting with big men and Rick Barnes. Anyway, you look at DJ Burns. You look now at Tamba and Huntley-Hatfield. Those are the three guys that come to my mind over the last 4 recruiting cycles, I guess, for Tennessee, who reclassified and joined Tennessee a year early than what they were, originally intended to do. And none of those guys panned out. 2 of them redshirted and didn't play a single minute for Tennessee and transferred out. And then Huntley-Hatfield played in, I think, every game this year and even started 13 of them, but never quite found his footing at Tennessee, and now is transferring out. So all 3 of those guys lasted a year or shorter at Tennessee and ended up leaving before they really got substantial. Well, 2 of them before they even played at all, and 1 of them before they really got substantial meaning, super meaningful. Because Henley-Hatfield played some meaningful games and meaningful minutes and some big games for Tennessee. But you get what I'm saying. He was never the big piece of this team that I think he hoped he could be and thought he would be. But that kind of builds into a point you'd made. It kind of goes into 2 things I want to talk about, with the fan reaction to this and what happens if Huntley-Hatfield goes and has success. Because the fan reaction to it was all over the place. A lot of people, blaming the player, saying it's all Huntley-Hatfield, but he doesn't have the attitude he needs to have. He doesn't have the work ethic and all this different stuff, and throwing him on the bus. On the opposite end, you had people throwing Rick Barnes under the bus, saying this is an indictment on Rick Barnes, and he he can't land the big man. This is all his fault. But this is a big loss. Somewhere in the middle was where most of the reaction was happening, or at least discourse that I saw. I saw some actually pretty good actual civil conversations happening, which was nice. But there were all over the place, Gene, I'm sure, I don't know if you probably saw it or not, but as you probably imagine, reactions all over the place on this specific one. Which is funny for a guy who, it's honestly because he was a 5-star. And he wasn't even a bona fide 5-star. He was a high 4-star on most services. I think he was a 5-star on 1 or 2 of them. But still, he had that 5-star next to his name. If this had been, I don't know, a middling 4-star, it wouldn't be as big of a thing. But as you said, your stars don't matter when you get to college. It's what recruiting people think you're going to be and trying to based off your skill in high school. Regardless, though, I think it's why it was more powerful for a guy who averaged 14 minutes a game, because that's not usually you're not usually having as much internet discourse as you were as I saw late last week, or I guess whenever it happened. God, my timelines are all mixed up. I guess late last week and over the weekend, and even until this week, over a guy who started 13 games and played in 14, 15 minutes a game, unless there's a 5-star attached to that player. But I'm curious your thoughts on it, Gene, because it's a situation where I'm not trying to place blame. I'm just not a big blame person when it comes to these types of things. I understand if the player didn't feel like he was a fit and wanted something different. I also understand maybe the coach made a mistake. Both sides are at fault most of the time. There's very rarely where it's cut and dry and one side is completely at fault, unless there's a legal issue where someone gets arrested for something then it gets kicked off. Pretty clearly that's a one-sided thing, that they did that to mess up and that's why they're no longer on the team. But when it comes to something like this, there's a lot more nuance to it, and unfortunately social media doesn't allow for a lot of nuance. But again, I did see some pretty constructive conversations happening, and I appreciated seeing that. But to me, Gene, what does it say about Rick Barnes or about the staff or whatever if Brandon Huntley-Hatfield goes to, whether it's Auburn or Georgetown or whatever school he goes to next, as long as it's a Power 6 school, not a smaller school? As I don't think it says a ton if he goes to an ECU or UNC Asheville and has success, because that's totally different. But if he goes to a similar school like Auburn, or at least a school that's in the Power 6 like Georgetown, and has success, and success is, I guess it depends on how you define it. Let's go and say he averages 10, 12 points a game, 6, 7 rebounds a game, and has, a pretty good shooting percentage from 3 or whatever. Just goes and has whatever you all define, who's listening to this, as success. Or how you define it too, Gene. What does that say about Barnes? Because I know, to me, I can already see it of where he goes, if he goes to Auburn or if he goes to Georgetown and he is doing a really good job, is putting up good numbers and is having a successful season there. Everyone's gonna, or not everyone, but a lot of people are going to want to say, look, this is an obvious whiff by Rick Barnes. This is another recruiting miss. Where he's had recruiting successes, but he has had recruiting misses. I'm not gonna try and pretend like he's his saint or anything like that. But I can already see it now with a lot of the people putting the blame on Rick Barnes, saying, "Oh, look at this! You look at him having success," because they already were trying to do that with DJ Burns, even though he's at Winthrop, which is a very different school than Tennessee. In fact, we saw the type of competition that Winthrop plays and what Tennessee did to all 3 teams that Tennessee played in that conference this year. So I should tell you what you need to know. Anyway, they were trying to do it with DJ Burns. They, to a much lesser extent, but I did see some people try to say it about Drew Pember. But what in your mind, Gene, does it say about, or does it say anything about Rick Barnes or Brandon Huntley-Hatfield or whatever if he goes and has success? Because I just don't think it's cut and dry that if he goes and has success somewhere like at Auburn or a big time school, that it's automatically a super huge demerit against Rick Barnes. Because maybe the move to another school is what he needed to, from an adjustment, attitude, mental perspective, like you had said. I think you basically said it, maybe this is the catalyst for him to get a perspective change. So maybe he needs a fresh slate. I don't know that it really is the indictment on Barnes that some people will try to make it out to be if he goes and has a success. But maybe people will paint me as a Barnes lover or an optimist by saying that, because I don't know. I just don't think it does, because maybe this is exactly what Brandon Huntley-Hatfield needs to go have success, is to go change scenery, change somewhere, find the right system. You thought this was going to be the right system for you, but it wasn't. So to me, it's all about fits and systems. You can be the most talented player in the world, but if you're not in the right system and not in the coaching environment that is best suited for you, you're not going to have success. It's all about fits. To go back to Jason Swain, he said that so many times from being coached by Philip Fulmer too. It is all about fits. And it's not just because you have the talent doesn't mean you're going to work in the system. So all of that, Gene, trying to condense it down to the fan reaction of it and your thoughts on, does it say anything, or what does it say if he does go to a big time program and ends up having, quote unquote success there? Is it a big indictment against Barnes, or just your opinion on that?
I see that this is an interesting conversation because I think the answer to the question is yes on both. I think it's an indictment of both sides, but maybe not for the reason that people, want. Everybody wants their pound of flesh right now and trying to figure this thing out. When you're in the recruiting process, quite possibly, the biggest thing that you have to do when you're recruiting is to really understand the psyche of the players that you're getting. I think if people listen to this program, I'm not a hater of, I didn't say it by name the first time, but I'll say it. I'm not a hater of the Bobby Mays AAU program. Let's be clear. But there is a certain sort of cult following that comes along with playing for that program. And those kids are essentially they're rock stars. And I don't say that necessarily in a bad way. It actually speaks to what he's been able to create. But I'm going to list a handful of names. Y'all remember Quante Berry, who is obviously is close with B.J. Edwards. They played together. Quante Berry's older brother Norrance is at Rhode Island. He's in the transfer portal. Wes Glover starts his career at Florida, transfer portal. Goes to Stanford, really good player. Drew Pember, transfer portal. Goes to UNC Asheville, it's a really good player. I guess the difference would be Jaden Springer because he was just kind of one and done. Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, transfer portal. Tamba, transfer portal. There is something to be said about trying to figure out what is the psyche of the kid you're getting. Anybody that followed recruiting knew that Huntley-Hatfield was a kid who spent his entire life out, playing basketball out on the perimeter. He was not a big. He did not consider himself a big. He did not fancy himself as a big. So it was always going to be a hard sell to convince this kid in 1 year, which is essentially what you have nowadays in college basketball, 1 year to convince this kid who has spent his entire life being essentially catered to because he played for this kind of cultish AAU program. In 1 year, now this is what you're going to be. You're going to be a post player. You're going to play with your back to the basket. Again, look over the years. I'm going to throw another handful of names I'm going to throw at people. Wow, I'm just looking here. Not everybody's going to be your Kyle Alexander kid. That was a 3-star kid who came in, worked hard, had a really good career. But if you look at all the bigs that have come through Tennessee, who was the last one to really stick? You got Grant. That worked. Keep going, though. John Fulkerson. 2 in 7 years. Hasn't it been 7 years? Something like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 2 kids have stuck. Truly stuck and been productive, had productive careers in 7 years. Again, I don't know this stuff in circles. I don't really spend a lot of time talking to coaches when I'm going to AAU tournaments. I just go to watch. I go to support my child who's a senior, will be a senior next year. I go to support him, and that's it. I'm not out here talking and analyzing. But I would imagine that it's going to only become exponentially harder for players to want to go Tennessee. Because the three have essentially had good careers. I said two, but I didn't count, Grant Williams. So Grant Williams, Kyle Alexander, John Fulkerson. 3 in 7 years. And look, that's a hard position to really figure that out anyway. It's a hard position to figure out, to really get kids in this day and age. And it gets easier for kids if you look at the Kerry Blackshears of the world. People felt like Walker Kessler had a good chance of coming out of high school. He didn't go. When he transferred, they thought he had a good chance. He did. He went to Auburn. 2 chances, and they didn't get the kid. So, to me, so when I say I feel like some of the blame goes on both sides, it's because as a coach, I feel like you need to know the type of player, the psyche of the type of player who is going to succeed in your program. Just like if you're a kid, you have to understand the type of coach that Rick Barnes is and the type of system that Rick Barnes is going to run. It's not going to feature you. I'm going to tell you right now, incoming freshman post player, you're not Grant Williams. Those kids don't just come. That success does not come immediately. Grant was productive from the moment he got there. But that's a kid who grew up being a post player. He had no choice but to be a post player because he was too slow to be a guard. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's just being real. I'm just saying, when you're 6'6", 260 or 6'6", 240, whatever he was, guess what? You're not going to be out there checking Jordan Bone in games more often than not. You're going to be down there you're having to grind because you weren't really provided the opportunities that the Brandon Huntley-Hatfields received. A Huntley-Hatfield who can just basically fall out of bed and have 15 offers. One dunk in a basketball game, and all of a sudden that kid's got 5 offers. That kid goes to an AAU tournament and looks, and all he sees is head coaches, not even assistants. To show how serious they are, you're seeing the head coaches sitting out there watching you, wanting to evaluate you. But you look and you see Tennessee. You look and you see Auburn. You look and you see Wake Forest. You look and you see whatever the school is. Because Wake Forest, that's a team that I would keep an eye on too. Know the program, understand who the head coach is at Wake Forest, and understand why I mentioned that. So, you look and you see all of that stuff out there. All of this love that you're receiving. Grant didn't have that. Grant played in those afternoon games. There may have been 3 coaches sitting there watching on a Saturday afternoon, kind of analyzing them. They're watching the other kids on the team. Grant has to do great things just to be noticed. They're not coming to watch him. And he got a chance. Admiral Schofield, they're not coming to watch him. You got to go out there and figure something out. And he got a chance, and he obviously thrived in that. These kids, like Huntley-Hatfield, he had every place in the country. He chose Tennessee. There's a different mentality that comes with that. I'm coming to you. What are you going to do for me? And in that first year, he got the start. Had some good games against some of the mid-majors. Probably had a couple good games. I don't really remember. Probably had a couple good games against some high majors, some SEC teams. Mm-hmm. But if you're not playing the way, especially when you're looking around and seeing Jabari Smith, you're looking around and seeing Bankero. These are guys who are about your same size. So it's not about you can't do that, kid. It's let me show you I can't do it before you just tell me I can't. Let me prove to you I can. Because guess what? Maybe I can do those same things that Bankero did. Maybe I can do those same things that Jabari Smith did. Holmgren, that's a different animal entirely.
Yeah.
This is a big man draft. It's a tall man draft. Maybe not a big man draft, but it's certainly a tall man draft. Where 3 of the names that will get talked about, you'll get to a guard because there'll be a program that needs a guard. And the Orlando Magic, they stink. The Houston Rockets, they stink, but they've got Jalen Green. Orlando, they stink, but they've got the kid from Gonzaga, who's a point guard, and they got Cole Anthony, so they need bigs. So, this is a perfect draft for programs like that who just need a big. So, if you're Huntley-Hatfield, you're looking around, you're like, why can't I be those guys? Why can't I get the opportunities those other kids are getting? And so that's why I say, I think some of the blame falls on both. Because, you're looking and man, you've got to have a full evaluation of this kid's psyche. Are you telling this kid in the recruiting process, that player you are in AAU, you're done with that? Because here's the difference. I watched Adu's film too. I watched Adu's tape when he signed. I said the same thing about him. That kid got acclimated. Didn't have an offensive game yet. He surely played some defense. And that's probably his best thing. But I think he's a different type of player than Huntley-Hatfield. And it's a different style. I think Adu, the way he played in high school was catch and shoot some threes. Catch, shoot some threes. But he was probably equally adept. Just, he didn't mind going down there. Huntley-Hatfield wasn't going down there and getting beat around and all that stuff. He had the ball in his hands. Scouting reports, high school scouting report on Brandon Huntley-Hatfield. Comparison, Julius Randle. When was the last time you saw Julius Randle post up? Has a quintessential power forward body with length. This is from Jerry Meyer of 24/7. Great dude, director of basketball scouting. Has a quintessential power forward body with length, strength, and density. Power-based athlete. High-level body control for a player his size. Can score from all three levels. Very comfortable with the ball. Has functional ball handling skills that produce buckets in scoring range. Can get to the basket efficiently. Loves to go left as a righty. Has ability to dominate his area as a rebounder. Improving as a defender is a proper area of focus. There's not a lot there that suggests, hey, man, I'll go down there and bang. He wants the ball in his hands. He thinks he's Banchero. That's about the same size, too. If I had to guess, they're probably about the same size.
I'm curious.
So I just think that, I think Banchero's 6'9", 250 in that range. I know he's a big body guy. And so that's the harsh reality of college basketball in this day and age where, you think that you've got a kid, and you think you may have him for multiple years. You think that he's a good fit for what you want to do, but you've got to convince that kid that what you want to do is what he's best at.
Yeah,
and I don't think that was ever the case.
Yeah, to your point, Banchero is listed on Duke's website as 6'2", 250, so basically the exact same size.
Yeah, so that's what. So if I'm him and I'm looking at what he just did, I'm looking at what Banchero just did. Helped lead a team that was probably the leading scorer of a team that went to the Final Four, and will be a lottery pick. I don't know if it'll be 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, whatever. I question his motor. I don't think he's got a great motor either, but he's a great player. And you take chances on great players. A player that size falls from 2 to 6. He doesn't fall from 3 to 17. So he'll still be a hot pick. We can figure out the motor thing. We can figure out some other stuff. Man, you see that jump shot he just made? You see how he got to the basket and dunked on that Carolina guy? Oh yeah, we need that. And so I think that's where the challenge comes going forward. Getting the guys who have the high star rankings is good, but it seems to me maybe go get those 5-star guards because they can look. All those guys, those 5-star guys, you get. I'll even add Josiah into this. You get Josiah, look at how he's thrived. Mm-hmm. You get Springer and Johnson, look how they've thrived. This year, you get what's his face, Kennedy Chandler. See how he's thrived. You get these kids and you see how they've thrived. like you're going to continuously get more and more kids. Watch B.J. Edwards thrive alongside Ziegler next year. And I do think, I think to be fair, full disclosure, everything I said about Bobby Mays' program, I think Edwards is more of a Grant Williams type. I do. I think that's a kid who wants to come in and grind. I think that kid's going to come in and work his tail off and be a great player. I just do. I think that everything in that kid suggests that he just wants to go be a great basketball player. And he's not wrapped up in all this, the glitz and glamour and glory of just playing high school AAU basketball. That's a kid that wants to win. And you put him alongside Ziegler, another kid who wants to win. And I don't see that guard position, especially if Vescovy comes back, which we all assume. Josiah comes back, which we all assume. You get all those kids back, all of a sudden you've got a pretty dynamic group. And then, look, maybe you just need a fifth guy who's just willing to just play a role. I mean, Olivier, willing to play a role. Euros, play a role. Like, you just need a fifth guy to play a role. That's all you really need. Go guard heavy. Find another guy in the 6'6" to 6'8" range that could be, kind of a clone of Josiah. And all of a sudden you look up, you only need 8. All you really need is 8.
Mm-hmm.
So you go get 8. You figure out your 8. I don't know who those are. Obviously, like I said, I just mentioned a handful of them. How's, Olivier when he comes back? All you need is 8. You need 13 on the roster, scholarship guys. You got 13. But you really need like 8 or 9 that you feel good about. And like you just have to figure out, because it just has not been the level. There just hasn't been the success with Tennessee in bigs, because I feel like there's 2 separate schools of thought there. There's going and getting the best players, which I completely understand. Go get the best player for your position, but at some point you're going to quit getting those players, because you look around and it's like these kids aren't coming in and producing. And if they go elsewhere, like I'm not counting DJ Burns.
Yeah.
I'm not counting that. I'm not counting DJ Burns. I'm not counting Drew Pember. I'm not counting those guys. Those are different guys. Like those are guys, like the one you have to be concerned about is, I doubt Tamba makes a lateral move. I do. Because A, you don't have any tape. No film of you. So, like, it almost would have made more sense for him to stay an extra year, and maybe it doesn't work out. But there's no tape of him playing in high school. It just isn't. And so there's no tape of him playing in college. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do? Like, what is your move going to be? Where's your market going to be? It's going to be mid-majors or whatever, so he doesn't really count. The Huntley-Hatfield, you got some tape on him. You've got high school tape of him playing one way. You've got college of him playing another. So what does that turn into? It's like you hope and pray that kid doesn't have success. Well, I mean, I do. I want kids to have success in college because that's what it's about. But if you're a fan of Tennessee, then you have to hold your breath and hope and pray that kid does not have success in college at his next school. Because if he goes and thrives, because he's going to make a lateral move in terms of Power 5 to Power 5. I can make an argument that we're actually more in a 7 or 8 league. We're in college basketball, it's more about 7 or 8 leagues. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've got the SEC, you've got the ACC, you've got the Big Ten, you've got the Big 12, what's left of it, and you've got the Pac-12, which is a very powerful league in basketball. Mm-hmm. But you also have the A-10, which had the number 1 team in the country just 2 years ago, right before COVID, in Dayton. You've got the American, which had Houston this past year. Although Houston's going to the Big 12, so forget that. Mark it out. And then you have the Big East, which is synonymous with basketball. So you got about 7 leagues. So that, again, I do think that now the American is about weakened, and so you got about 7 leagues. So say Huntley-Hatfield goes to Xavier. I don't really consider that much of a step down.
Yeah.
If he goes to say, East Carolina, that's a step down. It just is. The school you go to matters too. Mm-hmm. The conference matters, but the school matters. Mm-hmm. Is it nice to say you're playing in the SEC if you're playing for, with apologies to them, South Carolina? Apologies to that. I mean, but
But you're right, though.
that's
Yeah.
not even that's going to be a struggle for that program this year. So maybe you go out and you look a certain way, but your team stinks. It's going to take a year or two for that team to get figured out because half their team is already in the portal, and I have not seen him pick up a kid yet. And I kind of keep an eye on on South Carolina recruiting for obvious reasons.
Right.
But going to a Tennessee, transferring into a Tennessee now, that matters. Getting an offer from Tennessee matters. But if you're going to be on that coaching staff and you're trying to figure out what's the best for that program, then you have to really decide: do I need to go recruit stars, or do I need to recruit fit? And it seems like when Tennessee was most successful with its interior guys was when they got undersized post players, undersized guys who were just grinders. And your guards can be stars. That's also college basketball, though. Basketball in general. Your guards are stars. They are. Mm-hmm. And everybody else kind of fills into a gap, fills into a role. You got like a Justin Powell who can hit shots. I wouldn't give up on him yet. You've got other guys that can do certain things. Your bigs just need to be grinders. Because, you may have a moment. John Fulkerson may have a moment when you don't have anybody else on the roster. He may have a month or so when you literally don't have anybody, on the roster that can do much of anything at that point. But when you had good players around him, he had moments. Mm-hmm. He still had moments. Like the Arizona game, people will always talk about that Arizona game where he basically killed everybody with one move, which is amazing to me. Like it's amazing when you can be dominant and you don't even have two moves.
Yep.
And he completely killed Arizona with that drop to the basket, that spin, and that little floater. Killed him. And so figure out. It just seems like you have to figure out exactly what is best for you. If you're the coaching staff, and again, if you're the kid himself, like don't fall in love with the offer, and you gotta have people in your ear telling you what is the best fit for you. Like, do you think that you'll be happy in a program where you're being asked to post up 80% of the time? And just when you can sit there and try to convince yourself that I'll be the one that's different. He'll let me play this way, but year after year after year, that proves to not be true. So it'll be an interesting situation to watch going forward because I don't know what the end game is. I don't know if you're Huntley-Hatfield, what your next stop is. I don't have a clue. We'll see. But I know there's going to be a lot of fans that are waiting kind of nervously because this is the first kid that they've lost that's really made. I don't count Derek Walker. No disrespect to the kid, but I don't count him going. And look, if you want to count Derek Walker, so be it. He went to Nebraska. It didn't work out that well for him. But this will be the kid. This will be the first kid that you watch transfer somewhere else where you're like you literally have alerts on game to game his performances because you don't want to see if you want to see a portion of your recruiting dip. Let Huntley-Hatfield go to the next school and have a ton of success because that'll hurt.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with your point on saying that it kind of is yes to both questions, but I think that the last point you made was very poignant, that you want to hope the best for the kid, but at the same time, for Tennessee's sake, you kind of don't want him to have success, or at least not go and ball out. Like if he has some success, it's different. If he goes and balls out and is a first team All SEC player at Auburn, that's a totally different story. Really quickly, just to build off your point about what matters where you go, I was curious. I looked up the conference rankings for this past season for on KenPom. You had the Big 12. This is 1 through 10. By the way, there's 32 conferences now in Division I basketball. That's just a ton. But you have the top 10 that he had was Big 12, SEC, Big 10, Big East, ACC, which is 5th, which is very low for them, Pac-12. So those are kind of your main 6 right there. Usually is the Power Five in football, and then the Big East. And then you had Mountain West, the AAC, the West Coast Conference, and the A10. So those are usually your best. Those are typically your best Power Five, or excuse me, Group of Five conferences, with the Missouri Valley coming in 11th, and it's usually Missouri Valley is sometimes in the top 10 overall too. So those are usually your kind of next best, like, mid-major conferences are the Mountain West, AAC, West Coast, A10, and Missouri Valley. So just to give everyone kind of context on that, like, it really does matter where you go. It matters what schools you go to in the conference. Like Gene said, like, if you go to the SEC, but you go to a South Carolina or an Ole Miss, that's not the same as going to the SEC and going to a Kentucky or an LSU or a Tennessee or Arkansas. Like, it's different. If you go to the Big East and you go to, I'm just pull up a list of the teams. If you go to the Big East and you go to a Villanova or a Providence or a Connecticut, that's different than going to a DePaul or St. John's.
Bonaventure.
Yeah, St. Bonaventure too. That's another one that you thought, like, but I mean, typically, like, historically, I would say Georgetown, but Georgetown's been bad over the last few years. Like, if they, like, Brandon Murray, which I think is a good segue into looking at kind of what Tennessee's looking at to replace some of these transfers. Brandon Murray, who Tennessee was targeting, who last time we talked about, Gene, we said we would know Monday whether, where he's going. And we found out it is Georgetown, which may seem on the surface like a weird choice, but when you look a little bit deeper, you kind of understand a couple of reasons why. One of them was because former LSU assistant, as far as first name, I think it's John, but last name is Nickelberry. He was an assistant at LSU, I think, with the primary recruiter for Brandon Murray that got him to LSU. He is now with Patrick Ewing as Ewing's kind of last-ditch effort to save his job at Georgetown. And, more or less, Murray followed him up to Georgetown. He also mentioned, Gene, which I think is interesting, that he wanted to kind of help bring Georgetown back, kind of help them rebuild or whatever. I can't remember the exact wording now he said. But I also thought that was weird because I understand the desire to do that, because Georgetown at one point was a really, really good school in basketball. But if he's going to do it, it might be with, unless they get a lot done this year, it might be with a different coach, because I don't think Patrick Ewing, I think he's got one more year left in him to turn things around at Georgetown before he's canned. I cannot imagine them keeping him one more year if they have another losing season this year. I mean, this year was a disaster, 6-25, but even if they go like 12-18 or something next year, like I can't imagine them holding on to Patrick Ewing after that. But regardless, Brandon Murray's off the table for Tennessee. Really, you're looking at right now, looking at the departures team. We talked extensively about Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, who has a lot of potential, but potential means nothing if you can't cash in on it. I saw a great quote from, I don't know who it was, but someone on a message board for Tennessee that said something about the potential Hall of Fame is so much bigger than the actual Hall of Fame. And it's true, like, Tennessee has had, in football especially, had so many potential, like, Hall of Fame potential players that just never panned out for one reason or the other. Bryce Brown is one of the guys I always think of who is in the potential Hall of Fame, but not the actual Hall of Fame, because his potential at Tennessee was sky high, and it just never worked out. But you're looking at right now, Huntley-Hatfield fits a little bit more into that potential Hall of Fame than he does any other sort of Hall of Fame, but he has the potential. Can he cash in on it? Can he tap into it and unlock it at his next stop is the next question. He's kind of the biggest X factor and the biggest unexpected departure for Tennessee, because you look at who they've lost right now, and at this point, I don't expect Tennessee to lose anyone else via transfer portal or anything like that. But you're looking at who they lost. The two expected ones were Kennedy Chandler, your leading scorer, leading assist guy, your most talented player from this last year, going to the draft. Not a surprise. John Fulkerson finally graduated. So again, not a surprise. He doesn't have another COVID year he can cash in. So he's gone after his 29th season at Tennessee. Those are your two biggest losses, and your two ones you expected the most to leave this year. One, definitely. And then the other one, you pretty much felt the entire season he's only going to be here for 1 year, and he is. So you lose those two. Everyone else you lost has been bench players, because Huntley-Hatfield, he started, but he didn't play. Even when he started, he didn't play starter minutes. He was playing 10, 12, 14 minutes a game, even as a starter. But he's your biggest bench loss. He's a guy transferred. You also had Victor Bailey Jr., who was great in his first year of eligibility at Tennessee, but had a massive step back this year. And again, where you transfer matters, and it showed where he transferred. Again, he followed a Tennessee assistant to there, but still, where you transfer matters, and he goes to George Mason. And then you also lose Quentin DeBonge, who was a reserve, who I think maybe if they passed legislation for the new, like changing the redshirt rules for basketball, he would qualify. But again, that hasn't been passed. And again, he ended up transferring anyway. And then Andre Tomba, who didn't play a single minute for Tennessee this past year. All those guys are replaceable, Gene. Like, in a lot of, well, not all of them, I guess Kenny Chandler is, but all the ones who transferred are replaceable is what I'm trying to say. Fulgerson's replaceable too. Not from a heart and, fan love perspective, but from what he brought to you on the court the past couple of seasons perspective. Tennessee's looking at really kind of, from what I've been able to gather, there's like 4 or 5 names that are floating around with Tennessee right now. On the recruiting front, there's Julian Phillips, we talked about last week, former LSU signee, who, again, being tied to Georgetown is one of the options in Illinois, that was Brandon Murray. Being tied to Georgetown because, again, that's where Nickelberry is. But he's also a guy who's being recruited by a lot of different schools, but Tennessee feels like they're in a really good spot with him, but again, doesn't mean anything. I don't know if there's a decision incoming for him anytime soon. And then Renault, which I, again, don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but he's the former Florida commit who is both these guys are 6'8", kind of 200, 210 pound type of forwards. And then you have in the transfer portal, the biggest name that Tennessee is tied to, or the one that they really have a chance with, is Tyreek Key, who's an Indiana State transfer who sat out this past year because he had shoulder surgery, but before that was a really good kind of combo guard for Indiana State. Actually played, I looked up his stat stuff too, played well against Power 5, Power 6 competition when he played. He also played, against Loyola Chicago and stuff in that conference too, with Indiana State. But he's a guy who at one point in his career, his second season, I think like hit 44% of his threes, 39% his second year. And that's when he started getting shoulder issues, and it dropped off to about 32% in his fourth year there. And then again, sat out last year with a shoulder surgery, And that was a guy who he entered the transfer portal once before, and Tennessee showed a lot of interest in him, and he decided to stay at Indiana State. So there's already a connection there. Tennessee had pursuing him once. And then there's a couple other names. Nigel Pack is another one who is a point guard out of Utah State. Tennessee is interested there, I think. I don't know. I just don't know about how big of a mutual interest there is. There's talk about him potentially coming and visiting Tennessee. We'll see if it happens. I hope it does for Tennessee's case because he's seems to be very talented. But I feel like there are other suitors that are in a better position than Tennessee right now. Another name that I feel like I can mention because it's been mentioned off of just paid sites. I don't want to step on anybody's toes and offer up, free info on stuff that is on a paid website, but I've seen it enough now on other, online, like on Twitter and things like that, on enough, non-paid sites that I don't feel like I'm stepping on anyone's toes mentioning it now. But a guy who's not actually in the transfer portal, but has put his name up for NBA draft consideration, who very likely will not stay in the NBA draft and will pull his name out. And it seems like the thought is that when he does, there's a good chance he transfers or puts his name in the transfer portal, is St. Louis point guard Yuri Collins, who's a really, I think he led the country in assists this year. If he didn't, he was in top 10. A guy who has a very high assist total in his time at St. Louis as well. So, Gene, all of those names, to me, it looks like right now, and again, the transfer portal is just now getting heated up, and just now, like, people are still putting the name in the transfer portal. Like, as of today, I saw 3 or 4 more names get thrown into the transfer portal. It's like it's going to be happening, over the next few weeks. There's still going to be new names thrown in there. So all the guys that are in there right now aren't all the guys who are going to be in there. There's still going to be new ones popping in. But it seems to me that the plan looks like for I don't want to say big man, because the 2 guys they're targeting and recruiting aren't big men. They're 6'8", but they're 210. The tall guys, I guess, for lack of a better term, Gene, are Tennessee's are targeting and recruiting. It's in the transfer portal, they're targeting more combo guards / point guards, which I think makes sense because you have 2 young point guards next year who you would like to not have to hand over the offense to completely or just the team, I guess, whatever system over to completely in Ziegler and BJ Edwards. You felt better about it with Chandler because, and he's a great talent. I think you feel fine doing it with Edwards and Ziegler, but you'd also like to have a change of pace a little bit. Edwards is a nice 6'3". He's bigger than Kenny Chandler. But I think if you can get an experienced point guard like someone like a Yuri Collins or a Tyreek Key as a combo guard, it makes a lot of sense to me to get someone like that. Because you also look at the post, And you have some return. Like I think they'd be fine to get. I would love Tennessee to go target a transfer post player, but you already have, assuming he's healthy and stays healthy. Olivier Campbell, I think, was taking steps and showing progress this year. I think with another offseason under him and getting healthy, I'll be really interested to see what he does next year for Tennessee. You have him as your starting 4, maybe starting 5, depending on if you go small ball. You have Urosh as the backup there, and you have Jonas Adu, who we saw flashes of what he could do defensively, especially, and I trust him to be able to take another step forward. And I think he has, just like Huntley-Hatfield, I think he has a lot of potential. So those are your 3 guys in the post there. And I think it makes sense to go after a young guy because you have 3, I think, solid options returning for Tennessee next year in the post. I again am maybe not as high on the potential for growth in the post as some people, but I understand the reasoning of going after a guy in the transfer portal at the guard position rather than going after a guy in the post if you're just going to get 1, maybe 2 guys from the transfer portal. Again, I don't know. Tennessee has more open spots than I was expecting. But the point is, Gene, like, this team is, we talked about this briefly last episode. This team, I think, is still solid. Like, I don't think any of the biggest blows were guys you were expecting to leave in Kennedy Chandler and John Fulkerson. I don't think any of the other guys who've transferred are big enough blows that I'm feeling significantly different about this team than I was at the end of the year. Unless they go out and they don't add quality, at least on paper, from what we think from looking at the rankings and stuff like that. Unless they don't go out and add quality replacements, then I would be concerned. But I think Tennessee's targeting enough quality replacements that even if they miss on 1 or 2 of those guys, even the backup options, I think, will be serviceable enough to where this is still a top 20-ish team next year. Again, we don't know. There's plenty of pieces left to be plugged in. But my point is that I think Tennessee's going to be fine even with this roster turnover again happening this year. It's not quite as, I know it's, I guess, kind of on par from last year. You had like 3 guys declare for the draft and 4 transfers, and this year you've had 1 guy declare for the draft, 1 guy graduate, and 4 transfers. So pretty on par, actually. I got very almost close to being on par from last year too. So I know, but the whole point is to kind of close it out, Gene, is I'm not pushing the panic button. This is also not like Tennessee is the only team doing this. Like, there's almost every team out there has had 2-3 transfers or more right now. Like, this Tennessee is not a outlier in college basketball right now in terms of transferring out of the program and looking at filling roster holes on your team for next year.
Yeah, and like the decisions that'll be made. I mean, like, there's still, it's interesting because there's still a good amount of talent. Again, and once you figure out who the 8 are, you right now kind of have 3 bigs that you feel pretty comfortable with. You've got 5, 6 guards. We'll see what Edwards turns into. Obviously, Vescovy, Josiah. Oh God, who am I forgetting? Ziegler. That gives you 7. And then of course the elephant in the room is Powell.
Yep.
And that gets you to 8. If he turns into a guy, then that gets you to 8 players. So like the question is, like, figure that part out and see how things go. And yeah, like, I understand there's maybe a need to find some more experience at the guard position, but the last 2 seasons they've basically had freshman point guard.
Yep.
And they filtered in. Vescovy kind of gives you, Vescovy kind of makes it where you don't necessarily have to have, a ton of experience there. I mean, I guess it helps. But the whole season is meant to build and build and build. So it doesn't matter if, like, how much did the Villanova loss actually hurt Tennessee this year? Not much. Did it cost you a 2 seed? Whatever that discussion was about, perhaps, but it doesn't matter. I mean, still end up with 3, and we're still a really good team, and we're one of the hottest teams in the country going into the NCAA tournament. So yeah, like, I understand the need to, like, filter in spots. You don't want to just go get nothing but freshmen. You've got one already signed for next year, but maybe it's a case of like a James Daniels situation where you just think that he could be another good piece there. But I mean, like, just hearing the words transfer portal sometimes it has such a negative connotation to it. But I mean, sometimes the kids that are right there within the portal, some of them are wanting to, they're mostly wanting to go somewhere and get a chance. I mean, you take out LSU, like that's the prime example of kids just wanting a chance to be seen.
Yep.
Because LSU knows it's not going anywhere, and McMahon is getting players. And he's getting players with, and they have the understanding that, look, this is it. I mean, he's got a kid who's transferred in from Northwestern State. He's got 2 kids from Murray State. I don't know what else he's done recently. Those are just a couple names that I saw and people I talked to recently about what he's trying to do there. But a lot of those kids that are hopping in the transfer portal, those are kids who a lot of them want to be seen. They kind of want that chance. So can you bring a kid in now who may have played at a mid-major level and, tell him just come off the bench? Is that what you do? Like, I don't know. I mean, like, there's so many questions that come with these kids that are in the portal. That's why, Mike, it's so hard to really understand the psyche of the kids in recruiting. That's the most important part of it. Is understand the player that you're going after, understand the player you're trying to get. Because that's, getting that is, paramount to figuring out, to kind of building your team. Like, it's not just the player. It's not just the star ranking. It's who are we getting? Like, who is Nathanael Rutherford if I'm recruiting him? Who is he? Like, he's not a star ranking. Who is the player? I understand the star ranking, but who is the guy? And so, like, if these decisions have to be made, as these decisions are being made, I hope that that's, like, the most important part of what's being handled. Because, I know we were going to talk about this in a later podcast, but the culture starts with Josiah-Jordan James. And then you've got Vescovy. Yeah, Ziegler is, like, the fan favorite, but the culture starts with Josiah. Because that's the guy that was there when things were at their worst.
Mm-hmm.
Vescovy came in after that, and things started to improve a little bit, and he had some good games. But people have seen they have seen the careers, and everybody falls in love with the story and the career. And the greatest example of growth is in that kid. And so, like, how does anybody that comes in, how does that person mesh with Josiah? It doesn't have to be a perfect fit, by no means. But he should have to approve of these kids coming to the program because, look, as close as Tennessee's come in the past, 4 or 5 years, I'm not talking about how far they went in the tournament. Those were good teams. The 2021 team was okay, but this team this past year was really good. Like, he's come, relatively close. And again, even then, that 2021 team that lost to Oregon State, if what's his face, the kid who's transferring yet again, Omar Payne, if that kid doesn't knock, Fulkerson out with the elbow, maybe that's a different story. I don't know. Maybe that's a different story. And maybe they're making a run in March. I don't know. This past season, they had a team that was good enough. They lost to a team who, struggled to figure out who they were early in the season, didn't figure it out till late. And unfortunately figured out at the right time, to make it all the way to the Sweet 16, which Michigan seemingly lives in. So if I'm Josiah, look, man, I'm here. I'm here to win, chips. So this is the situation. BJ is going to be one of our guys. Ziegler's going to be one of our guys. If Vescovy comes back, he's going to be one of our guys. Josiah-Jordan James, is going to be one of those guys. Can you filter with what we're trying to do here? Because if they do, then it doesn't matter. If Tyreek Key is the answer, that gives you a good-sized kid who can play. I'm pretty certain. I think I can say with some certainty that kid's not going back to Indiana State. You don't do it twice. You don't keep putting your name in the portal and copping out, in and out, in and out. I think he's out this time. So I think he's gone this time. So if they can figure out, who the best fit is for this program, there's no reason to think that. I mean, I think I've seen rankings that are probably like 15, 20. Those way too early, whatever, somewhere in that range. And those rankings don't really matter. At no point during the regular season do those games matter. At no point. Like, it's just building how good your team is going to be. How good is your team? How connected is your team? And if that team's connected and talented, there's nothing that tells me that they can't be one of those still trendy picks again next season. Because as long as Rick Barnes is in Knoxville, the recruiting is going to suggest that Tennessee's going to be a trendy pick. I understand the March stuff, and it is what it is, but they'll continue to be a trendy pick to win a championship.
Well, Gene, we've already talked for almost an hour and a half, and I feel like I could talk for even longer, but I don't want to make this podcast episode too long for our listeners, so I'll end it here. Sometime here soon, I think I mentioned it last episode, I'm definitely going to do a mailbag episode sometime soon, because I want to get some questions from our listeners to kind of answer, and I think maybe the next one, but we've had so much to talk about. Now I'm afraid next time, Gene, we record, we'll have another transfer out or transfer in or recruiting commitment. There's going to be some big news that happens that I'm not going to want to do another mailbag episode that soon, because we'll have plenty to talk about. So, I mean, heck, even next episode, some of the stuff we talked about here, I feel like we could build off of and have a whole episode about. So we'll see how it goes, but I don't want to make this one too much longer, but I think hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Again, let us know your thoughts on it, whether it's on the Twitter communities or you're commenting on our Facebook post or if it's on the YouTube channel. Would love to know your thoughts on anything about Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, anything about who Tennessee's pursuing, the way the roster could check out next year, or Josiah-Jordan James and the cryptic tweet, or anything we talked about here. Please let us know your thoughts. Would love to hear what you guys have to say. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.